Hi, and welcome to NewsReal with Joe and Neil.
I'm Joe.
And I'm Neil. This week we're going to be discussing what it is to be woke. Are you woke? Besides it being grammatically incorrect, of course, what does the term rather mean to people? We have to ask because in these times of raging polemic about everything, social justice, identity politics, cultural values, everything really, it's become apparent that what it means to be woke, in quotes, it means different things to different people.
Mm-hmm.
I guess when we were awakened, I hate that it's grammatically incorrect, but I'm just going with the flow, right? When we were awakened, it was either I think 9/11 did it for a lot of our listeners, or the aftermath, let's say, the noughties, the 2000s. And 9/11 was important because it was such a high-profile event. It dominated the news cycle for a long time, and its consequences were immediately linked with 9/11, so it was constantly in the news and therefore on people's minds for a decade, all the way up to, let's say, the 2008 financial crisis. So, and the theme of it, I suppose, what linked people being awakened in the sense of taking the red pill and becoming aware of the matrix and all that stuff. That analogy applied, or the metaphor rather, had meaning for people on the internets, from the point of view of conspiracy theory, which of course was a pejorative term in the mainstream culture.
Still is.
But it still is. But it was, of course, to people who were choosing to go down that route of looking and studying and understanding as best they could what was really going on with these events, 9/11, the war on terror and so on, was that it was not conspiracy theory, it was a conspiracy fact. Of course, it's very hard to, nail any one thing down, but there was nevertheless a vibrant discussion about it. And then that itself, of course, became polemic and people took sides and there was infighting in the truther movement and all that stuff. But anyway, that more or less defined the parameters of what it was to be woke for about a decade. There's also an overlapping theme with New Age consciousness, which obviously goes back further as well. That's kind of, 2012 as being a significant year, interest in ufology, the paranormal, the singularity, all this stuff.
Spirituality.
And spirituality, of course. But there was some overlap, but there were roughly two different ballparks in discussion of waking up to this deeper reality and so on. And then there's another wave after the noughties, let's say. We're into the teens now. I suppose that's a starting point would be Andrew Breitbart, the culture wars, largely originating in the US and by now everywhere, fighting back. That's fighting back against yet another ballpark of being woke, and that's the basic, the liberal/left awakening. That's the thing that drove forward, with gay marriage, the normalization of transgender issues,
Rights for everybody.
Yeah, rights for everyone, social justice, and the apparently, I suppose the appearance of what was a sudden activation of many, many things that have been generally more dormant or latent since the 1960s, or really only discussed in academia, but suddenly they were proliferating everywhere. That's the recent wave of what it was to be woke, to be awakened to the deeper reality. That's the one that dominates now. But it's interesting that you have then the term being used, and it depends on who you are and what milieu or aspects of reality you're looking at. And so it has completely different meaning for you. I suppose it was a counterculture thing, an underground thing, but these days you can find it used casually, not in a derogative sense, but in mainstream analysis. And of course, that's coming from a completely different understanding of being woke.
Yeah, I think there's bleed overs amongst the various types of woke people. Obviously, like you said, going back to the kind of 60s and the New Age movement and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the stuff that people on the right wingers complain about today, which is progressive values and social justice warriors and minority rights, minorities, rights for everybody, basically. That has been going on really. That was given birth to by the or that's part of the kind of 60s awakening, let's say, spiritual awakening, because all of that stuff that kind of people on the right or conservatives complain about in terms of progressives today, that's been going on. I mean, you can see videos on YouTube and stuff of shows from the 1980s that are talking pretty much about exactly the same thing, like even Saturday Night Live skits and stuff like that, and other kind of shows that broach those topics and are pushing those topics of social justice basically in the 1980s and stuff, so it really began since then. It came out of that 60s counterculture movement, but also anti-war came out of that movement as well. So the two developed kind of like on the same track, parallel in a parallel way since then, and then they kind of matured effectively, and people, I suppose, gravitated towards one or the other. People back in the 60s were involved in the anti-war movement in the 60s who today are, they're obviously aging quite a lot at this point. If they were 20 or 30 years old in the 60s, they're getting on now. But those people are still, a lot of them are still very much anti-war, and they're the same. When 9/11 came along, it wasn't too hard for them to accept the kind of conspiracy theory of the possibility that there was something else going on around 9/11, or
at the least that it was used to justify wars of
imperial
expansion.
Well, yeah, of course it did. I mean, that's not even a conspiracy theory, right? That 9/11 was used as justification for the U.S. military to project its power into the Middle East and beyond is objective fact. No one can call that a conspiracy theory. That's what happened.
It's only recently become non-taboo in mainstream to say that, really.
Well, that's bizarre because that's what actually happened.
Right.
I mean, you had Donald Rumsfeld I think the day or two after 9/11, saying basically, he wrote in his little memos that were released saying, sweep everything up, basically about Iraq, related and not. So his agenda immediately after 9/11 was, how do we use this to get into Iraq, to blame Iraq, or to use it to justify a U.S. military invasion of Iraq, which they did, obviously, less than 2 years, 18 months later. But first of all, they went to Afghanistan, obviously, and there's reasons for that we've talked about in the show before in terms of geopolitical motivations. Just look at a map of Afghanistan, or a map of the world, and look where Afghanistan is, and you should be able to understand why the U.S. military wanted to plant itself there for the past 17 years. And not leave for no really good reason. The reason that they're staying there is never spoken about. No one ever tells anybody why they're there. Of course, Taliban and helping the poor Afghanis. Despite the fact that the Afghanis want rid of them and have wanted rid of the US for probably more than a decade now. Probably maybe from the very beginning, most Afghani people weren't that interested in the US being there. For 17 years, they've stayed there with no public rationale or reason given, except
for 12 years it was the hunt for Red Bin Laden.
Wow, around Afghanistan, like a freaking...
that was the ostensible...
Keystone Cops or
the official mythos.
They play the Benny Hill music, running around Afghanistan. It's true, but yeah, obviously these have geopolitical explanations for why the US military wanted to do this. It involves Russia, and obviously Russia is a hot topic and has been a hot topic over the past 5 or 6 years. So, but anyway, getting back to the point, you had these kind of two tracks, anti-war and kind of the more spiritual, more kind of civil rights movement that carried on from the 60s in parallel, and they matured effectively over that period of 30, 40 years. Since then, they matured, and until and you still have obviously the anti-war movement that, as you said, focused on 9/11 and evil doings by evildoers in high places and stuff, and wars for profit, blah blah blah, terrorism, false flag terrorism, that kind of stuff. And then you had, at the same time, you had a maturing of the more progressive, liberal, lefty, let's say, attitude of remaking society or trying to find a way to make society more a more positive experience for everyone to reduce kind of evil things like racism and sexism and xenophobia and that kind of thing. And it seems it just came to, at least for those progressives, it really came to a head, or it matured to the point where it kind of burst on the scene over the past, 3, 4, 5 years. But yeah, the conservatives don't seem to have anything wokey about them, except maybe you could say that right-wing conservatives have woke to their own tradition, let's say, or their own traditions, and the need to enforce their own traditions. Everybody's woke or has woken up to the need to defend their ideology, their position, or whatever it is they believe in, basically, because it's a battlefield. So everybody's woken up to the fact that it's a battlefield in different ways and from their different perspectives, But yeah, so it depends. I mean, it gets back to things of the topic I've talked about in the show previously as well, is about the difference in human beings, innate differences in terms of their, I suppose, it's people's worldview or their proclivities, the things that motivate them basically at a fairly fundamental and deep level. What they see, and that applies also to what they see. I mean, it obviously influences what they see in the world. Your innate characteristics, nature you could call it, will influence and filter what you see in the world and the way you see things that happen in the world. So there's really given that there's no way to reconcile, if there are those two, let's say at least two fairly fundamental different types of human beings. Of course there's spectrums and stuff, and people can kind of be a bit of this and a bit of the other, but if you're talking about all the people on the planet, or say in Western society today, it seems that there is a fairly sharp division. You could put together a bunch of questions, let's say, for maybe fairly oversimplified or black and white questions, but you would get very clear different answers from different people for those questions, in terms of how society should function, what their values are, that kind of thing. So, and there's no, like I said, in that case, there's no way to really. It doesn't seem to be any way to reconcile those two people, to get them to agree. That doesn't mean they have to fight, but certainly you're not going to get both of them in the position where they've taken, in the case where they've taken extreme positions, you're not going to get them to agree with each other's extreme positions. They could agree on some of the middle ground type thing, but apparently that's not very popular these days to try and get people to agree on a middle ground.
I think the conservatives, if there's any side, those leaning that way, did do some fairly wokey stuff in terms of that had profound implications. Obviously, the election of leaders that the system, the establishment, wherever it is in the West especially, reacted against and lashed out in fury. That's a pretty profound change. Obviously, Donald Trump's election and also Brexit, but the other things as well. And then there are pretty profound, and many of them they're subtle things to figure out. Like the proliferation of, in France especially, 5 years ago there were mass protests. That at first I had no comprehension about what was going on. There were huge protests of up to 500,000 people in Paris and other major cities. They were parents, school teachers bringing their kids along to these manif pour tous, protest for all or something, and it was themed, and they had waving their flags, and you got into the details, and it was protested specifically about the pushing of gender theory / sex education for very young kids, a lot of other ultra liberal really stuff that was coming into the school system. Well, that's what I mean by subtle, where I suppose it probably isn't subtle if you're a parent and the child's starting to say and do strange things. It's in your face, and how you can't avoid it. You will feel a reaction to it. But it's more subtle in terms of the narrative they built about that, because they are seeing things in conspiratorial terms, namely that there's an agenda to push this, even if they can't quite name who's doing it. Although in France they can. They have people they have identified as the key promoters of these kinds of things, and they have reacted against it. So that's very profound. Now, maybe from our perspective, where it's, well, we don't want to toot our own horn, but the deeper, darker stuff of really, really waking up to the matrix, they haven't gone there yet, so to speak. But then there is overlap where, if you look at the conservative, in quotes, reaction in the United States, a lot of it does incorporate awareness of false flag issues. Mm-hmm. There was that upset over Benghazi, which never really got to the root of it, but it was awareness that the US government does things in the people's name with their tax dollars that are just outright criminal according to US law, international norms, etc. They didn't quite, follow it all the way through to Al-Qaeda is CIA, is 9/11, but they have in other respects, again, with Syria. It kind of gets murky where they start to say, well, Obama was a traitor and he was a Muslim and he was part of the conspiracy. And it's a little too simplified a narrative, but it's still quite a profound realization that powerful interests are behind a lot of the ills in the last 15 years.
In society, yeah. I mean, talking about powerful interests, they obviously, it's a bit of a cliche, but they've obviously been trying to, there has been an agenda to divide and conquer. Let's say divide people, maybe not conquer. I don't know if they're being conquered yet, but I suppose to the extent that they've been divided and set against each other, they've been conquered. But that's happened forever, really. You take the fact that of all of the news, even in the mainstream media, that's come out about the US, for example, and Western countries supporting in some way or other, arming, funding, or training jihadi rebels, Al-Qaeda, effectively, the ones who attacked us 9/11, and how little outcry there was about that. Even when it appeared in the New York Times or whatever, and a lot of people were aware of it, there was very little response to that. They expect, you'd think that would be like a deal breaker for the American people or for people in Western countries to realize that their government had actually been supporting the terrorists who had been attacking them and who had attacked them on 9/11 and been carrying out terror attacks in Europe. But that didn't happen, obviously, and I suppose one problem there is that people ultimately feel that they need to maintain a loyalty to their identity, their country, their nation, in whatever way it's configured. That it's people are very reluctant or resistant to the idea of or suggesting that they should just totally cut ties with their government and their national identity. You're asking people to remove any sense of national pride or even getting into their own identity and stuff, and that's something that's fairly precious to people. So I think people ultimately will allow governments to do all sorts of terrible bad things because ultimately you need some kind of somebody to run the country. You need a country in which we live, and we need to have a cohesive national identity. I mean, people are more afraid, let's say, have been more afraid of social discord or social chaos than they're afraid of government leaders or people in positions of power, mismanaging the country or being corrupt or whatever. They're willing to ultimately give them a pass on that because they realize that if they were to take any action, to try and correct that, it could end up in some kind of a revolution or some kind of a social chaos. And that's been a problem, because you're not going to get people to rebel against their corrupt authorities. Mm-hmm. Really, I mean, ever. It's the last thing they will ever do. But so yeah, division in that respect, is like identifying countries. We're American and we got to stick with America, come hell or high water. And the same applies to other countries, any other country around the world, let's say, and the people that live in it. So that division is kind of built in there, as part of human nature. And then, so it's not surprising that you see then more smaller scale divisions among the people, when they identify that they're a part of a group within the group of Americans, they're part of a progressive or left-leaning group, or part of a right-leaning group. Yeah.
The thing that triggered me to even talk about this topic at all was I was passing through the Guardian website. Very dangerous activity because you can just find yourself it's an interesting snapshot though on the liberal left side of what it is to be woke. Just in 24 hours they had 4 before, one of them actually is a few years old, articles on being woke. Again, it's using the analogy or the metaphor used in the Matrix movie to waking up to the deep truth of reality. But the context in which it has meaning for them is so alien. It's like, well, that's nothing to do with what it was originally meant around 9/11 and to what it's meant to all those people going online for their news these days. It's really like, it's so out there. There's one op-ed opinion piece. It's bemoaning that corporations are embracing socially conscious products, and that, quote, we seem to have moved from an advertising ethos of sex sells to social justice sells. Well, that's a good point, but the author has been bemoaning it not because that has happened, but because it takes away from the authenticity of social justice for her. She's not saying corporations shouldn't do this, but they should do it more responsibly, more consciously. Don't just imitate it and use it to sell your brands, but actually mean it and show that you mean it. It's like she wants it to. It's part of the ethos that's driving what she herself is trying to sell, quite consciously at this point. But actually, the ones I want to show people are a couple of articles on how to find Mr. Woke. Literally, they're like in their culture section about finding and dating or dating the socially conscious partner. This is from yesterday. My search for Mr. Woke, a dating diary. This is probably another regular columnist. Don't know Kimberly McIntosh. Don't know who she is, but
I took a vow to date woke men only.
Let's scroll down. Can you scroll down to the more I learned about racism and feminism? I think maybe about halfway down.
I saw the word vagina there.
There it is, there. The more I learned about racism and feminism, the smaller the pool of potential suitors became. While being thoughtful, funny, smart, and able to put up with my unbearable flaws is a must, I became aware that my match also has to be serious about social justice to be my type on, this is supposed to be funny, recycled, sustainably sourced paper, but that kind of gives you an indication of what you'd like. Next paragraph. Today, my work involves researching the links. This is what she does, her job, researching the links between race and inequality for 2 think tanks. So she's really like, a true believer. For her, if woke means being alert to injustice in society, especially racism, then I am on constant high alert. A potential partner needs to be at least on medium alert for it to be workable. Eventually, I took a vow to date woke men only. So you can see that's clearly a specific definition meaning for her.
The previous paragraph, while being thoughtful, funny and smart and able to put up with my unbearable flaws is a must. Do you think she's going to get a lot of takers on that one? Like advertising that you've got unbearable flaws and you just have to put up with them?
I suppose it's meant to be self-deprecating.
But that's not, you don't attract any men that way. By saying I'm an unbearable old hag or something like that, come and date me. Those people are bizarre. And I noticed, I just saw it as you scroll down. I haven't read the article, but I saw it as you scroll down. And for some reason, I have to put the word vagina in there. All these like the last, just the paragraph above. No, it's just the paragraph above the one we read. Whatever, just make some reference to vagina. Very good. I have no idea why you would put that in there, other than maybe as a hat tip to feminism or something, because feminism is obviously so crass these days that it's just, you can just shout vagina or something and then you're a feminist. You've made a point, you've made a really important point by shouting vagina in the street. That's kind of how bad it is, but we don't want to be too dismissive of progressive type ideologies as they appear in the world, particularly in the West today, because we understand that they have appeal, and we understand the appeal, and we can see how it's appealing even ourselves. Obviously we're talking here about social justice, to doing away with as much racism and sexism and xenophobia and abuse of minorities, all that stuff. That people in any one society would live together peacefully and not be antagonistic towards each other. I mean, who can argue with that? Right? When you go down the street, you don't want to see people fighting with each other. You don't want to go into a cafe or a bar or something and see someone being discriminated against or being treated badly. I mean, that's the weird thing is we here, the three of us would be the first people, as I'm sure many listeners would be the first people to step in if you saw someone being unfairly or unjustly treated in public. You know, maybe it'd be a bad idea to step in, but you probably would if you could ascertain that there was clear abuse going on, you know, and that would put you immediately in the progressive camp, right? You would get a gold star, you know, but that's not. We don't swallow that whole, if you know what I mean. We're not full on progressives because we understand that the situation is is pretty complex, and that the problems in society today, of, for example, of where the left promotes diversity, multiculturalism in Western countries, and that everybody should be colorblind. There should be no bad reaction to anybody. Like the West, let's say, is obviously predominantly a white, Christian or white society or societies. So anybody who is not white or not Christian or both should not be discriminated against in any way. But the problem is that this is happening at a time, 17 years after what we mentioned previously, 9/11 and the beginning of the War on Terror, which was used by the US and its allies to project military power and boots on the ground and CIA shiny black shoes on the ground and corporate shoes on the ground into the Middle East for all sorts of reasons. But, during the invasion of Iraq, 1.5 million Iraqis were killed. It was presented, the justification for the invasion of Iraq after 9/11 was that Saddam had some ties to Al-Qaeda, who supposedly carried out 9/11. And there was also the claim by the British Prime Minister Tony Blair that and his people that Saddam could attack the UK in 45 minutes. So they peddled a bunch of lies that demonized the Iraqi people, or Saddam Hussein, and by implication the Iraqi people, as kind of bad people, bad leader, bad people. Of course, they give lip service to saying, or give lip service to the idea that our argument, our problem isn't with the Iraqi people; it's only with these bad leaders. But at the same time,
when we go there, they'll welcome us with flowers.
But they didn't do that when they went there. A large percentage of the Iraqi people, I'd say pretty much the vast majority of the Iraqi people, were against the invasion of Iraq and the occupation. And also a significant percentage of the Iraqi people either took up arms or supported those taking up arms against US troops. And those ordinary Iraqi people then killed a lot of US soldiers and sent them home in body bags in coffins with the stars and stripes. And this was, those events were presented in the mainstream media to the American public. So after 17 years of that, and that's just Iraq, you obviously have Afghanistan as well. You have terror attacks going on that were invariably blamed on Muslims, ascribed to Muslims. So it's not surprising, given that after 17 years of that kind of propaganda and that kind of experience that was had by Western populations, that you're going to have some segment of the population, at least, who is going to have some level of dislike or fear or problem in general with Muslims / Iraqis / and for a lot of people who aren't who don't think about it too much, it's just an amorphous group of Muslims that come from the Middle East, the general Middle East area,
But statistically, the highest numbers, I don't know if they comprise the majority, but you can look at the flows of refugees / migrants. They came from three places: Afghanistan, Iraq, then Syria beginning 2014, and Libya.
Right.
So they are the four places that were targeted.
So Western countries demonize the leaders of these Muslim countries in the Middle East area, and by implication, the people of those countries. And then when, as a result of the Western wars and bombings of those countries, you have an influx of migrants from those countries, the people who have a kind of problem with that, a knee-jerk reaction to the idea that effectively our enemies, and the people that we have been told by the media are our enemies over the past 15 or so years, Now we have to welcome them in. And if the people in Western countries show any aversion to them at all, then they're demonized or condemned as being racist, xenophobic, and pure evil, Nazis, whatever, Islamophobic, by other people in Western societies who somehow have been able to overlook the fact that, for 15 years we were told that Muslims are terrorists, and not only told that, but we had all had very shocking experiences, if not directly, kind of by or indirectly, through multiple terror attacks, really brutal terror attacks. Here in France, for example, the Charlie Hebdo attacks and the Bataclan concert hall attacks. Last year you had the Manchester bombing, Ariana Grande Manchester bombing, and then way back 2004, Madrid bombing, almost 200 people killed in a train station by Muslims. You had the 7/7 attacks, 50-some people killed by Muslims. I mean, repeatedly over the past 15 years, the Western populations have been treated to this idea that Muslims are, and they're not wrong, to the extent that was a story they were told, that Muslims are have a tendency to be
caught up in or directly involved in.
So you can't blame a lot of people in Western countries for feeling that I'm not too sure about the whole Muslims coming in. And even when the media goes as far as to say amongst the immigrants coming in from the wars, that there are probably ISIS or Muslim terrorists in amongst them, but then at the same time you're not allowed to have a bad reaction to it, which seems totally unreasonable. Even just from accepting normal human responses, normal human nature, it's unreasonable to demand that someone does not have that kind of a bad response after that experience, and to demonize it, and then that to be used to divide Western society itself, regardless of immigrants. You know what I mean? Today it's not immigrants as you might have thought, like immigrants against Western populations, the ones that don't like them, but rather that it's Western people, white Westerners against other white Westerners, the ones who think bring all the immigrants in, it's fine, none of them are terrorists regardless of the propaganda, and the other ones who say, hang on a minute, the propaganda says some of these people might be dangerous and it's not a good idea, So it's totally unreasonable for anybody to say that, that right-wingers or conservatives or whoever, anti-immigrant people have no case whatsoever, and they're just pure out-and-out inveterate racists, and they should be condemned. They should be, and they should be forced to accept the immigrants. Well, hang on, that's not fair. And you're only going to create conflict if you try and force those people to do something that arguably is not a reasonable thing to do, or to force them to back down from their position, which is arguably a reasonable position. Mm-hmm. So that's why we tend to kind of criticize the left, the more radical, outspoken, progressive lefties, because they're pushing the situation too far, too fast, and against years of propaganda that says, Muslims don't really like us. They're kind of, some of them, a lot of them anyway, don't like us. And sure, maybe the majority of them have no problem with us. But how do you separate out the ones who do like us and the ones who don't like us? And how do I know? If I'm walking down the street, how do I know that this group of young guys are the ones that have no problem with Western society, as opposed to a group of them that might actually have a problem and might just take an instant dislike to me and try and chop my head off? It's an extreme example, but it's not an unreasonable fear that some people would have.
Yeah, statistically it's improbable, but given what has happened, it is rational to apply caution. And it's not just in the two sides, roughly, especially on this issue that have formed in the West. The population on the side of let them all in, really, and castigating those who would urge caution as being racist and irrational, that they have power. They have the establishment, mainstream on their side, the same ones that went into all these countries and caused the problems. And of course that breeds conspiracy theory in the sense of it breeds suspicion that this is being done deliberately, but I'm not sure. I think it's obviously it's an open-ended debate you could go on and on for. We have had a bit of it here before, but to what extent is that being consciously done? Okay, well, besides that,
there's something weird about it, right? Yeah. There's something weird about the way that the whole thing has transpired. It's almost like it has conspired. Let's not say someone conspired, but that it conspired to happen in a very particular way. I mean, you had 9/11, 2001, that launched all of this. That really is the cause of a lot of the problems in the world today, and that coincided with the kind of dawn, really, of the internet age, because only around the year 2000, that people were really starting to get on the internet, and it's only in a few years after that you had things like Facebook and YouTube and all this kind of mass, social media platforms that people could, express themselves, and that's where a lot of the noise is today on social media, or is in societies, in Western societies today. It's on social media, and it's via the media. I mean, before the internet, before you could go and look at CNN online, you had to go and buy. Well, you couldn't buy anything from CNN, right? Did they have a paper? No, I don't think so. The Washington Post, the Washington Times, the New York Times, or any of those newspapers. You had to actually go and buy a newspaper to read about it, right?
I think you had to buy cable TV to get CNN.
Right, for CNN you had to watch it on TV, but people weren't spending the amount of time they were online. There were no such thing as computers that people had in their houses that they spent. Some people spending long hours every day. So the whole thing has just all happened, come together at the same time, as 9/11 happened, and then everything that happened since then you had this opening up of the ability for people to express themselves immediately and directly in real time on the internet, and as a result of that, you have this flowering of conflict and division in society. It's something weird about it, no? There's something, I'm not saying it's calculated, but there's something fortuitous, or that's the wrong word maybe, something serendipitous maybe, about the whole thing,
Well, along those lines, my closing point on this would be, people are waking up, but to what? Or maybe a better way of putting it is, what is it that is waking up in people? That's a scary thought. Like, you remember, I believed it and expressed it a lot myself. I think a lot of people still do. Kind of, okay, so the world's a dark place, or it has a lot of dark things that go on in it. And that's to be woke to the horror of the Matrix and the horror, the terror of history, as Eliade put it. But they would come to a kind of an optimistic or hopeful viewpoint when they went, you know what, people are waking up. They're few for now, but they're waking up, and they're waking up in bigger numbers, and things are going on, and then there's another event that's caused a shock, and there's more waking up going on. But if it's the case that there's different types of who are becoming activated, woke, according to deeper beliefs, their programming, judging by the trend of things becoming more and more divisive and polemic and even violent in terms of attacks on people or people getting banned for espousing viewpoints and so on. The darker prognosis for this is it's not pointing towards a kind of a singularity where we all wake up and work towards world peace and harmony. Rather, it's pointing to the activation of these different types becoming increasingly bitter and ultimately violent towards one another. So we're waking up to what? A kind of a war.
Yeah.
The mother of all standoffs, really. And it's two basic sides, but there are lots of overlapping factions and so on. So there's more than just the potential for my side and your side. Who are you with? Well, thank God I'm in safe company now. At least I'm over here with, because within that there will be different.
Yeah.
So it's a waking up going on, but to what?
What rough beast? It's our come round at last.
Yates
slouches towards Bethlehem, or maybe not Bethlehem. Slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
The centre cannot hold.
Yeah,
that one is a good poem.
Yeah, the second coming. I don't know what to say about it. And there's not much to say at this point because it seems like the past few months I've had the impression that, you know, people have kind of, the people that are going to make a choice, that are going to decide on one vision of reality or another, have kind of made their choice, you know, most of them. And, you know, beforehand you have this kind of, you have this cacophony of fighting and shouting and people at each, you know, arguing, let's say, over their own particular ideologies and the way, their vision of society and vision of the world. But it's almost like as a result of that argumentation, people have had enough essentially to make a decision, and they've kind of separated out into their opposing camps, let's say, in their own minds, you know. And it's almost like there's a kind of a quiet that has come over that battlefield, if you know what I mean. And it's not a battlefield yet. It was just it was a
training camp,
well, or an arguing, a shouting match type thing, and a quiet has come over it because people have taken their positions effectively, and the only thing left to happen now is for a battle to be enjoined, you know, in one way or another. And I don't know. I mean, everything that happens on the political level as well, you know, the high level politics, the whole Russia business, and Trump, it's all sounding to me more and more like just so much noise, you know, that there's something else, you know, something bigger waiting to happen, some kind of denouement, and everything else is just noise. And even the people who are shouting about Russia, I mean, there's nothing to be achieved through any of that. There's nothing being achieved except it's almost like it's a distraction in a certain sense to keep people distracted from something else, because nothing is really going to be achieved. You know, there's not going to be any World War III between the US and Russia. You know, and Trump is a real kind of he's a real fly in the ointment for a lot of people, obviously, but the way that he just has made a kind of a, you could say that he's made a mockery of American politics, but from my perspective, he's actually exposed American politics and Western politics in general for the kind of corrupt, cronyist outfit that it really is, you know, and always has been for a very long time. And he doesn't stand on ceremony. He doesn't try and appear, you know, presidential and, you know, polished and all that kind of stuff. He's just and he engages in bizarre kind of politicking where he'll like level a threat at Iran that it's going to be, you know, it'll go down in the worst fiery cataclysm, you know, i.e. nukes, whatever. It'll suffer it'll be in the worst pain that anybody's ever been in
all of history.
In all of history, and words like that. And then he turns around
to a country that's 5,000 years old.
Right. Then he turns around a few days later and says, "Man, you'll be able to talk to Iran. Actually, it's all good." And people are like, "What?" You know, so it's like, but that's that makes a farce out of the whole thing, but it actually exposes a truth about Western politics. Is that it mostly is a bit of a farce, you know, that a lot of stuff is said to the public. I mean, people can't complain that Trump is saying stuff to the public that isn't true, because politicians have told the public lies, you know, and told them things that were not true for most of history, you know. So there's an unveiling happening, if you know what I mean, for a lot of people via Trump, you know, an unveiling of the truth of how politics actually works, because Trump can do that, and it works quite well. You know, if that was something that was not in any way kind of part of the way politics works or part of the political landscape, then it wouldn't work. You know, it would break down. It would fail. He wouldn't be able to run the country. Wouldn't be able to run a government type thing. But he's actually able to run it quite well, as good as anybody else, effectively. So that means that, you know, the reality behind the scenes has always been one of just, you know, of mostly bullshit, you know, while the country kind of runs itself behind the scenes, and the government is just meant to be there to kind of provide a veneer or appearance of authority, you know, to keep people quiet so they can be content that, well, somebody's looking after the difficult stuff. But actually, if you look at the way any country runs, it's the people are running it. You know, that's not to say that a hierarchy isn't necessary, but people should realize that. They should certainly stop or not deify, or elevate their political leaders beyond what they really are. We've seen in the UK as well, like with people like this kind of caliber of people, that populate governments and supposedly take all the decisions, stuff like Boris Johnson and stuff. Boris Johnson in the UK, guy's a complete. I mean, if you saw him in a pub, you wouldn't. You'd want to leave. Like, I mean, you wouldn't want to be anywhere near him because unless you're a similar type of kind of old Eton kind of school, private school, old imperial type thing who likes jokes about the darkies and that kind of stuff and guffawing and slapping each other on the back type of thing.
In that case, you'd recognise a kindred spirit.
Yeah, but there's not many people like that. You know what I mean? I mean, there's not many people go to Eton and private schools like that. So.
In terms of this denouement, I don't know quite what you had in mind, but what came to mind for me was we'll see further explicitly totalitarian measures, moves, events, laws being foisted on people. And I wondered if this thing that happened last week where Alex Jones / Infowars, I'm not sure whether it was his accounts or more generally Infowars, were just simply deplatformed across the board simultaneously on 5 different platforms, obviously suggesting there had been an agreement and a decision had been reached, and boom. He's not quite there yet, but it's like rendering someone unperson, especially in this time and age, and given his medium and his profession. Yeah. You are now unperson. But
obviously, it attracts a lot more people to his. It gives him a lot of attention, and he gets a sympathy vote, and he gets the people. A lot more people would assume, let's say, or would be open to the idea that he may have been saying something that was valuable. So there's certainly it's a double-edged sword in that respect, and also unless you can make sure that Alex Jones never appears on the internet anywhere. Again, you probably shot yourself in the foot. Whether that was deliberate or not, I don't know, because, I mean, Alex Jones obviously says a lot of crazy stuff, so he's a real mix of truth and nonsense, really, So,
something that needs to be said is to those of the right complaining that it's mainly them being targeted. Maybe you can make that case, but a lot of I don't know how key they are, but a lot of lefty sites are also being hit in this, usually in the same clandestine ways, by shadow banning, blocking likes, or listing them as fake news and then shunting them off to crappy news feeds, or all the various sneaky underhanded ways Facebook and Twitter are doing it. But this week, the day after, a lesser well-known lefty site was also just unpublished, just taken off Facebook completely, and that's Venezuela Analysis. They're basically English language, probably a group of journalists based mostly in Caracas, Venezuela, reporting on the situation there. Just boom, you're gone. So it's happening. It's happening to dissent of any kind. It's not on ideological grounds in terms of left-right. It's something that's obviously more nuanced than that. And in the end, I suppose what they all have in common is things that report truths that the powers that be don't want reported, basically. Venezuela Analysis obviously would have gotten a lot more traffic recently after the previous week's attempted assassination of Nicolas Maduro. What happened there? Was that like a botched operation? Has the CIA just gone sloppy?
I don't think so. It sounds like it's something organized by in league with the CIA, perhaps with some help from the CIA, but certainly it seems like it was an operation put together by the anti-Maduro, anti-Chavista bloc in Venezuela, the right wing, let's say. But certainly
more interested in making a show of
warning, that kind of thing. Yeah. But I can't imagine. I would imagine that they would have liked the idea if they had. They would have been happy if they had killed him, But the fact is, the drone kind of blew up fairly high up in the air, kind of over the. He was at a speech, you know, so it was a rally or whatever, and it was in a big kind of open area, and it blew up, you know, maybe a few hundred feet up in the air, kind of out in front of him, you know. So it seems weird. It might have been on a timer or something, and that was botched, whatever. So it was, you know, it certainly didn't have the kind of the craft of a Western intelligence agency that I'm sure would have been able to do that more effectively, you know. Because if it got that close, why could it not have got closer, you know? It's hard to say. But, yeah, it was just...
It's typical. It's in keeping with the right-wing, in quotes, opposition to Maduro in that country. I mean, they're almost universally portrayed in the Western media, left and right, alternative, independent, and mainstream. Maduro's government is portrayed as either mad socialist
dictator, because
socialism is lefty, thus evil, or he's a dictator, you know.
And both. Socialist dictator, yeah.
Yes, at the same time.
Which is weird.
And yet, and by implication, the protesters that they're speaking up for, who want normal, good things, right?
Oh, the right-wing ones, the ones who keep they're the ones who keep the minorities as, you know, as almost unpaid help and kind of slaves in their big fancy houses.
Yeah, they're generally drawn from the middle class, the wealthier classes, but their behavior in protesting is getting more and more. It doesn't surprise me that there's been an attempted assassination with drones and bombs, because they've been setting off bombs before now. They've been killing police. They are behaving. This is pretty much like Kiev. They're behaving like Yukis at the Maidan.
Yeah. So
and there is nothing redeemable about them that you want to be identifying with and speaking up for against the evil socialist tyranny. But not in this context.
Yeah, but the bizarre contrast there is that you have country outfits like CNN that are totally anti-Trump and totally, you know, fully for the kind of progressive movement in America, are talking trash about the socialists, the leftists, effectively in Venezuela, and big upping the right-wingers. Right. So effectively, CNN, who trashes Trump and Trump supporters in America, is fully behind the equivalent, the same type of people in Venezuela. The right wing. It's the right wing that the right wingers who bear, a lot of them bear all of the same, or have all of the same attitudes and beliefs as right wingers in the US. Yet CNN supports them while trashing them in America. So how can you take someone like that? How can you take anybody like that seriously? But then again, how can you take that kind of any kind of ideology, fixed ideology? You know, anybody who holds to a kind of a fixed ideology in the world today seriously, you can't take them seriously, because they're, by definition, people who hold to those ideologies are unthinking people. Mm-hmm. They're people who engage in oversimplified black and white thinking.
In the end, they're rooting for their team.
Yeah.
Although at home they're in a polemic against the opponent. It's kind of like when it translates to anything outside of NATO stand, outside of the West, well, that's my team. And they will defend their team in that context. It's bizarre, though.
Well, what they're defending is the CIA, right?
The CIA and friends, yeah. Because
that's who they're
people
getting
behind the fake
from.
news hurting their Trump.
Right. But that's who no. I mean, the CNN is in defending right-wingers in Venezuela. They're essentially taking their cue from the CIA.
Right.
Right? So CNN is, like most of the other media outlets in the US, are part of the war party, and have been, going back to 2003 and Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, and, you know, Gaddafi's bombing his own people in Syria, gassing his own people. You know, these are people who are full-on exponents of the deep state. And of course, they find common cause there, because today they don't like Trump, and the deep state doesn't like Trump either. Doesn't like right-wingers, doesn't like alt-right. But they like the alt-right down in Venezuela for totally different reasons. It's not ideological, American ideological in that point. It's about geopolitics.
Right.
It's about the CIA wanting to get its hands on, and politicians and corporations in the US wanting to get their hands on Venezuela. So then you can totally flip your allegiance, because because money. So it's absolutely cynical, you know. And
Venezuela is probably a whole other topic, because I mean we can debate as to which of the factors that are causing the crisis in the country are internal, and which, as the government there has routinely claimed, are external, being done to it. But just note that right now it's possibly going to blow up in Turkey. The Turkish lira has crashed, and there's talk that they might be on. They themselves have issued public statements saying that we're coming under attack.
Well, yeah, but Erdogan's
from
saying
international terrorists.
Erdogan, whether it's true or not, has come out and said that's nonsense. You know, that's just pure propaganda. There's nothing wrong with the country. Economy isn't collapsing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just pure, because part of an attack on a country is propaganda as well.
Right.
I mean, you can affect the economy of a country by talking badly about the economy, right?
Which affects the markets, and investors start to
in the
pull
markets,
out.
Blah blah blah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, that's part of the attack. You know, it's propaganda. Well, we've seen that with Russia. Obviously, the main arrow in the West's quiver against Russia over the past 4 or 5 years has been information. Nothing. I mean, they haven't really. They have done nothing to directly attack Russia in any kind of a
countermeasures in a more concrete form, although it's still largely digital, were necessary. Like, the people have remarked about it, the way that they handled at the financial level handled the attacks, because the ruble did fall, and it was they thought, here it goes, it's going to start tumbling. But they activated a kind of a Russian investment fund that they'd been pouring oil money into and saving for exactly this kind of scenario. They kept buying gold.
Right.
So,
but in terms of the balance of what has happened over the past 4 or 5 years against Russia in terms of the news,
it's information.
Most of it has been Putin killed my baby, Putin's an evil dictator, Putin and Trump collusion. You know, it's been trying to the point where they've just demonized. I mean, an example is the World Cup in Russia. There, you know, it had particularly from certain countries, mostly Western European countries or Western countries, you had kind of historic low attendance by people from the UK and France and stuff, simply because of what the media has been saying about Russia.
Yeah.
You know, so that's an economic impact, let's say, to some extent. Not a significant one, but
it was
an economic
filled by
impact.
people from everywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
There were 7.5 million people, I think I read, that went to Russia.
Yeah, it was 80,000 Chinese, and the Chinese didn't even have a football team there.
Right.
So, The only thing I'd say about one last thing I wanted to say about the left-right divide is that we, like I said at the beginning of the show, is that we understand the appeal of progressive politics or progressive ideologies of wanting everyone to live peacefully, and also to reduce the amount of suffering in any given society. That, you know, people shouldn't be subjected to undue suffering or have to deal with it, you know. But that's the key word there is undue suffering, you know, or unnecessary suffering, because what it seems that particularly in the more radical aspects of the right wingers and progressives, they seem to be pushing for this idea or for an idea of removing all suffering behind the scenes or deeper down in their subconscious, whatever their motivation is, to remove any suffering from individual, personal, or in general social life, and that anywhere where suffering of any type raises its ugly head, it should be stamped out, and if necessary, it should be legislated away,
enforced. That's another key aspect of it.
Enforced by legislation, and that seems to be an unrealistic, let's say, approach to take, and it's doomed to failure, and it's doomed to create conflict. If you're going to have to force through law, effectively, people to
be tolerant. It's intolerant now to be tolerant, or vice versa. We must only tolerate tolerant people. I mean, it's obviously going to produce
conflict.
What we're seeing,
right? And they hope they can get the state behind them to enforce that. But then that's going to just create social chaos. It'll create far more social conflict than there would be under a normal situation where you just allow for some some kind of racism or sexism. You allow men to kind of, like some men or whatever, to wolf whistle at women in the street or whatever, that kind of thing. And even worse things than that, you know, you accept the fact that there's going to be a certain amount of suffering in life, that it's it's a natural part of life's experience, that everybody experiences some level of suffering, and in different ways, and that you have to accept that, and you do your best to alleviate and to minimize the unnecessary suffering. But beyond that, you don't push it any further, because ultimately you're going to stray into infringing individual rights. And once you start infringing on individual rights for one person, then you'll start doing it for everybody. And ultimately, you just create a backlash. It's so eminently foreseeable that that's what's going to happen if this process is taken to its illogical extreme.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, that's why they're called crazy people, because, I mean, if you can't see something as obvious as that, then there's something wrong with you, you know what I mean? But when you're in the grip of an ideology, apparently you don't really see reality very clearly. You only see your ideology.
Yeah, part of what makes this such a tragedy is that there are many things that have been traditionally leftist wants, let's say, fundaments that would be part of the utopia that they envision. There are many things that are universally agreed. They've done all kinds of research by polling people and just rephrasing it a little different. And functionally, there are some key leftist wants that are shared universally. You would get 80 and 90% of people saying, yes, definitely. That's what we either want or we would like to see more of, because many of these things are already incorporated, basic rights for workers, holidays, and so on, and some kind of, well, it's a pejorative term, but socialized Medicare, where there's, no one needs to be in terror of breaking an arm, because that will cause more pain. Like, that's ridiculous. Everyone agrees on a lot of the basic things, and the leftists still today are saying, well, hang on, those things haven't been brought in yet. We're just looking for those. But there are all these other extreme things that are tacked on. And unfortunately, some of them don't realize, some of them do, and they distance themselves from it. But it's like it's too late. These things have tacked on and used just and universally accepted causes or wants of most people to bring in some extreme things that are universally rejected or almost universally rejected, and that's why it's such a, it's what makes it a tragedy, because
well, we're gonna have to wait and see.
There's so much that could make the world a better place, but
but you need level-headed people, basically, who are able to engage in nuanced thinking and see down the line a little bit, and not just live in the moment and their immediate needs and wants, but there's very few of those people around, and apparently a number has been done on people in Western society in particular, to make that an impossibility for an awful lot of people, and so we're just going to have to wait and see where it goes. But I suspect, like I was saying earlier on, that there's something else is going to come along to kind of really wake people up, in a proper way, and maybe bring them back to reality a bit. At least we can hope, or we can only hope that'll happen, because right now it's just pure madness. Something needs to come along to stop the madness, But I think we're going to leave it there for this week, folks. We hope you liked this video, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you liked it, like it, push the like button, push the subscribe button, click on it. And also, what's the other one, Scotty? The info button?
Notifications.
I keep getting that wrong. The notification button. Give the bell a ring there as well. So until next time, have a good day.
See you next time. Bye, everyone.